Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States of America, the Great Emancipator, born in Kentucky in 1809. Or was he?
Well, I grew up with knowing about Abe Lincoln all of my life.
A number of family legends in western North Carolina offer a different Abraham Lincoln birth story. According to their tradition, handed down through generational lore, the great leader was born in Rutherford County, North Carolina, and his correct birth year is 1806, not 1809, as the Kentucky story reports.
It was a traumatic event, you know, the way it is told, the way it would have unfolded, because there would have been, you know, there would have been adultery, there would have been illegitimacy, there would have been, and all the things that go along with that, then and now, for that matter.
Well, we call our story here more as much as anything the Nancy Hanks story. And if you go to Kentucky, they don't know anything about Nancy Hanks till she just all of a sudden arrives and maybe there a short while and marries Tom Lincoln.
I was always told in growing up as a walker that Abraham Lincoln's mother was originally here in the county when he was born.
Growing up in this area, there was always, you know, that Abraham was born in Rutherford County. There was always the debate as to who his actual father was, but there was pretty much no doubt that Nancy Hanks lived here.
He always said, "All I am and ever hope to be, I owe to my mother."
The story begins with Nancy Hanks, Lincoln's mother, who arrived in Rutherford County as a child, when her single mother, Lucy, became destitute and could not support her children.
Lucy, in search of work, could not support her 2 children, so she bound them out to 2 families here in Rutherford County, one of which is the Abraham Enlow family.
She ends up in the street corner or town square of Rutherford without anything to do, any place to go, any resources at all. And that's when they contact Abraham Enlow, because he is a pillar of the community, leading citizen, that sort of thing, as to what can be done. He takes Nancy Hanks in as a bit of an indentured servant type, and she goes to work for the family.
And so she stayed with the Enlows, and I feel very certain that she probably learned to read because his family was, he educated his children, and I think by her being there, that's where she learned to read.
Though she was considered being bound out, she was treated very well and like a member of the family. She was taught to read and write and treated with the greatest of respect by the entire Enlow family as she became part of that family.
By the time she was about 9, 10, and then they moved to Oconee-Lufty, leaving this area here.
Now at that point the story gets a little fuzzy as to the relationship between Abraham Enlow and Nancy Hanks.
Supposedly Nancy gets pregnant.
Although there have been over 17 possible fathers named for Lincoln, by far the strongest connection is that of Abraham Enlow. Enlow was a well-documented pioneer of America's westward expansion. He was described as being considerably over 6 feet tall, weighing over 250 pounds, raw-boned. His hair was black and coarse, and he had dark skin and deep-set gray eyes. One of his sons, Wesley Enlow, lived into the age of photography. He bears a strong physical resemblance to Abraham Lincoln.
And Nancy began taking trips with Abraham, trips where he went to visit and conduct business in Creightonville, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, and further west, which as an adventurer, his dream was to continue to head further west. And it was along these lines, apparently, that Nancy became pregnant.
The wife of Abraham Enlow finds out that she's pregnant, and she thinks maybe her husband is involved somehow, so she walks the girl out of her house. So Abraham Enlow goes to Felix Walker, his friend, and asks him to take her back down to Rutherford County.
My ancestor, James Rubin's brother, Felix, helped move Nancy Hanks around when she got thrown out of one household and had to be moved. That Felix helped was the one that was responsible for relocating her because of the shame and all that involved. He said they just moved the woman around all over the place.
In the late 60s, early 70s, I would go with my grandfather to the feed store and or in any number of other places, and occasionally we would somebody would bring this subject up about you know you're kin to Abraham Lincoln, don't you? You know he was born over here off of Puzzle Creek and different things, but of that nature. But my grandfather seemed to always dismiss it. You know, best I can remember, he believed it to be true. It had been in the family and passed on to him.
I'm 77 years old, and like so many of my age group and others before and since, we heard about this as we came along. About every family had a version of it, and all of it was essentially the same. Of course, it would have questionable additions and deletions and other things, but it was all basically the same story, that Nancy Hanks birthed a baby boy here in Rutherford County and named him Abraham.
My name is Bobby Walker St. Clair. When I was in high school, I wrote a thesis on Abe Lincoln, and in my records that I found at church, it had Nancy Hanks' name in there, and it also went into details of how she was a member and she brought little Abe to the church. Our church was organized in 1804.
It was letters that was preserved over the years in the family that was written back and forth between Ansel Dicus and Jane Dicus during the Civil War period. Now, in one of those letters, there was a reference made that some of the talk around the local folk here was that Abraham was actually born in Rutherford County.
And the card says this lady lived down the street from Abraham Lincoln's mother and grandparents. She told my grandmother that his mother had him one night and the family moved out of state the next day. He was born in North Carolina, according to her.
She had friends that would go to church with her, and when she was going to have to be moved, she went to the church and with her friends to tell all of the church people goodbye.
And she tells about in the letters about how they stopped at the house to get some things as far as going on their trip, and they had been given a horse and a wagon and a few supplies.
The tale had started being spread that Abraham Enlow had her killed. So Felix brought her back to that area to prove indeed that she was alive and that she did have a child. And it was at that point that she connected with Tom Lincoln, went to Kentucky, and was then married.
Now, where does that come from? Why is that something that persists? If it is indeed a lie, it's a pretty powerful lie that no one has any way of, making capital off of it to continue to tell. But it remains a part of family traditions, not just the Enlows, but all the folks around the Enlow family that continue to tell it too. Why do they do that if there's nothing for them to benefit from, other than the fact they believe it to be true?
Through the generations, many local and regional historians have fought to preserve the Lincoln birth story. Perhaps the most successful was Tom Melton, whose efforts led to the founding of the Bostic Lincoln Center. The center continues to collect generational folklore and houses a small museum for the many visitors who come seeking the roots of the Lincoln story. Several families seeking generational knowledge have begun a petition calling for the DNA comparison test to Lincoln. Perhaps the world will soon know the scientific truth behind this powerful legend.
What we're talking about, though, is an exceptional person, most studied person, I think, on earth, around the world, seems to me like, other than Jesus Christ, and yet they have not yet put together what formed him, and that's what we're about right here. The origins of that great man.
Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. Yes. Holy ground, yes, holy ground. Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. I am the Lord thy God. God spoke to Moses from the burning bush. Burning bush, yes, burning bush. God spoke to Moses from the burning bush, said, I am the Lord thy God. Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. Yes, holy ground, yes, holy ground. Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. I am the Lord thy God. Well, look yonder, Moses, see salvation work. Salvation work, yes, salvation work. Said, look yonder, Moses, see salvation work, for I am the Lord thy God. Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. Yes, holy ground, yes, holy ground. Take your shoes off, Moses, you're on holy ground. I am the Lord thy God.